Hello, everybody. Good afternoon, and welcome to the third session today on the third day of the 18th Vermont Organics Recycling Summit. I'm Natasha Duarte, the director of the Composting Association of Vermont, and we organized this summit in partnership with the Vermont Agency of Natural Resources. This year's summit is being held as a kickoff event for International Compost Awareness Week, which starts this Sunday. And it's the largest and most comprehensive education initiative of the of the compost industry. And the theme this year is Compost Nature's Climate Champion. And I want to just draw some attention to this poster here on the right. It is by a student in Dr. Deb Nair's Compost Ecology and Management class at the University of Vermont. Each year, they create their own posters interpreting what the theme means to them. And there's an entire gallery of it on our website at compostingvermont.org/VORS. And if you click on the posters, you can read the students' inspiration and interpretation of the theme. And so this has just been a fun collaboration that we've had with the students at UVM for the last couple of years. I'd also like to thank all of our sponsors and exhibitors, without whom we would not be able to put on a week-long summit, and certainly wouldn't be able to provide all of the virtual content free of cost to all of you. So huge thanks to Community Bank, Eco Products, Addison County Solid Waste Management District, AgriLab Technologies, Casella, Food Cycler, Nature Cycle, Vermont Natural Ag Products, Viably, CV Compost, the Vermont Produce Program from the Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets, and Woods End Laboratories. So huge thanks to all of them for helping us continue to put on this week-long summit. Here we are today on Wednesday. As I said, this is our third session. It's the Haulers Roundtable, and we're going to be talking about maintaining clean streams for composting, the who, the how, and the why. And with that, I'm going to introduce Tom Gilbert, who is going to start us off with a short presentation about what he does at his site and some of the things that he thinks about. And so, Tom, I'm going to stop sharing and invite you to share your screen while I introduce you. Tom is the owner-operator of Black Dirt Farm in Stannard, Vermont. Black Dirt Farm is a diverse and integrated agroecological farm that includes food scrap collection, laying hens foraged on compost and worm castings production, and crop production. Tom has been working in and managing food scrap collection and composting operations, while also working as a community organizer for 25 years. Previously, as executive director of Highfield Center for Composting, Tom oversaw the organization's Close the Loop Vermont campaign to develop community composting systems throughout Vermont, as well as its composting and collection operations research education program, which produced the Vermont Compost Operator Certification course. And so with that, Tom, please take it away.
Okay, so we're switching things up a little bit because I don't know that we have as many haulers in attendance as we had hoped. Could we get a quick just show of hands from participants as to who hauls organics in the program here?
And that's whether you're in Vermont or otherwise. So a couple, I saw two.
So historically, the roundtable has been this kind of cool opportunity to create a community of learning among haulers to keep pursuing specific aspects of our craft. And we've had sessions on equipment and sessions on material handling. We were hoping to do today on source separation, seeing as we don't have as robust of a group as we can. I've built in a little bit more of a presentation on source separation, and then we will have a haulers roundtable, and then we will change the format for the last half of the program a little bit. But I want to just kind of move through my slides so that we can get on to the conversational part, because this is really about sharing ideas as a community beyond just what we do here at Black Deer Farm. So okay. So I'm not going to spend much time talking about the farm and specifically like our bigger picture, but this is just to give you a little snapshot of what we do so that it kind of makes sense as we're talking about things. So the important piece here is that we maintain sort of a chain of custody of our carbon. When we go out and pick up food scraps, we're handling the food scraps then on the farm as both a hen feed, and then eventually we're making compost and things like worm castings, and then also growing crops with those same compost products. So one, we have kind of an economy of scope as opposed to an economy of scale. We don't just do one thing and scale it, where our goal is to sort of achieve a bunch of outcomes. But also that we have like a very, very vested interest in the quality of those things, because each thing affects the next. It also gives us a particularly kind of unique view into the whole system. But more relevant maybe to this group specifically is just, the context in which we do pick up food scraps. And I mentioned this since we're talking about food source separation, because each context, whether you're dealing with residents or whether you're dealing with commercial generators, is slightly different. And again, sort of like the farm and being scope rather than scale, we kind of we see ourselves as a community composter, and therefore try to meet all the different needs of the community in this realm. So you have large commercial generators, like in the top right, that's a grocery store. They do about 25 totes a week. And then we've got restaurants, like the bottom right there. We've got pods, which are a subscription-based decentralized drop-off program. That's the center picture. It's about 20 to each pod. We've got various community drop-off points, bottom left there. And then we deal with a lot of schools, state institutions like prisons, nursing homes, hospitals, industrial food manufacturers. And in all of these cases, we need to maintain the same quality standard. And so source separation is, among other things, one of the things that connects those all together. For those of you from Vermont, you will be familiar with this language probably. These are our codified definitions pertaining to the universal recycling law around composting and food residuals. But basically, it is the law of the land in Vermont that food scraps be free of contaminants. That does leave a bit of a subjectivity out there, I suppose, as to exactly what a contaminant is, and that's a further conversation. But for us, among other things, we consider bioplastics to be contaminants. Bioplastics, even if they are certified biodegradable, often have lots of toxic chemicals in them, and while they may have a standard of biodegradability, are not necessarily benign in the soil. We also have the organics management hierarchy in Vermont that does affect things like source separation, but I'll leave it to say that basically the better we do as a community at source separating materials, the more opportunities for more appropriate allocations of those resources we have. So source separation really creates space for something like the hierarchy to work. Okay, so just to jump into the source separation piece a little bit, I think it's probably somewhat self-evident as to why source separation is important. Basically, we're trying to prevent the contamination of food scraps and thus compost, and thus the soil the compost is applied to from being contaminated. And there's a lot of pathways that those contaminants can find their way into our compost products. And so the more vigorously we're able to source separate, the more we're able to mitigate those potential sources of contamination. But one of the things that I'll argue for today is I think there's a tremendous amount of value in source separation, not just as a way of keeping our organic materials clean and free of contaminants, but I think it actually helps to build the society that we need right now to grapple with larger, bigger, pressing issues like climate change. There's something in the behavior change world called spillover effect, and I think source separation is one of those things that has spillover effect as well. we'll talk on that more. These are not pictures from the 1980s of mixed solid waste composting. These are pictures of contemporary composting facilities, one of which is now closed, I think largely due to these levels of contamination. But this is what industrial composting looks like in a lot of places. And I don't think that those are, images that reflect the sort of quality and cultural standards that we want to apply here in Vermont. And so, we should be really cautious about what an unmanaged approach can look like. And a lot of the things that end up in these material streams, if we're not careful, often seem relatively benign. So I'm not going to get into it, but there's actually a fair amount of studies on microplastics and PFAS and other things that we often think of being connected to. Let me say that differently. Things that we often think of as benign, like a piece of cardboard, often have more to them than we think and can leave behind legacies that we are not anticipating. So Woods End and EcoCycle did a study a couple of years ago, and among other things, for instance, they sort of broke down like a juice carton, and it turns out it's, as we know, it's not just cardboard. So these are common sources of contaminants that we need to really figure out how to mitigate. And the challenge with source separation is it's a little bit of a task. It requires a little bit of awareness and thinking, and so we need to. Oh, I'm sorry. We need to kind of begin to, as a community of folks trying to achieve these things, better clarify sort of our roles and what we're each doing. And so today we're talking about source separation from the standpoint of a hauler. But I think the reality is that source separation needs to be a goal of everybody involved at all aspects of the system. So if you're a state employee, source separation, you're in charge of the source separation parts that you connect to, the statewide messaging, the communication to businesses and schools. Haulers, we have a unique opportunity because we're essentially the interface between where that material is generated and where it's going. And we're impartial. We're not the generator and we're not the composter necessarily. And so our ability to sort of say what's reasonable, what's not reasonable, is there. And as a result, we kind of act more like a broker or a arbiter in these things, not just a transporter. So we're going to put a special focus on haulers right now, but in every organization present here, there is an opportunity to be an active champion of source separation. A fair amount of conversation these days as we realize how important it is to mitigate sending food scraps to the landfill, about how to do that and keep it free of contaminants. And we hear a lot about mechanical innovations to mitigate packaging. I just heard yesterday of an AI system that was being tested at a resort, and you come up to the sorting area and you scan all of your items essentially, and it tells you which bin to put it in. There may be appropriate applications for all these things, but on a larger public level, I would argue that the mechanical and engineering and technological advancements in these spaces are potentially putting us at a disadvantage as a society in terms of like building the social capital that we really need to be able to do the heavy lift of kind of transforming society. So this is about social innovation primarily and culture change. I'm not going to read through these slides. You can kind of read them as I go, but there's more here than I'm intending for you to consume right now. But the basic premise here is that we are involved in behavior change. That's what this is about. And behavior change requires some basic components to it. And one of the biggest components is intending to change that behavior. That seems pretty straightforward, but it's pretty significant. And really what it means is that we're not talking about changing the behavior of putting a material in this bin or in that bin. That's the outcome of the behavior. The real behavior is the thought process that we utilize to think about what's in our hand. And so this is the nature that of sort of the approach that I think we need to be endeavoring upon, is really engaging our communities, our customers, our employees around the psychological frameworks that we apply to these materials, to these systems, and fostering systems that can be successful for the outcomes that we're shooting for. So if you fundamentally believe that behavior change isn't possible, but you believe that we need to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions for climate change, it's kind of a hard proposition to square. You actually need to believe that people are capable of change in order to get people to change. And so sometimes I find in talking with a lot of folks that actually the folks, be it at a state agency, even if they're in charge of waste mitigation, or be it at a waste district, or even at a composter or a hauler, the fundamental problem is that the individuals involved actually haven't shifted their own behavioral intent. And so that's something that we all need to look at. But the other part is that there's this incredible opportunity. This is time and effort well invested. And so, with schools, it's often hard for us to get in and get the school to really give us the space to do trainings. But I think that there's this incredible opportunity to create a spillover effect. And if we actually really focus on source separation within the school, we're also helping passively and actively foster this idea of embodied, engaged citizenry within our students while they're in a learning environment. And that seems super important and appropriate. We're not just talking about food scraps. We see this all the time. We often have to kind of pull teeth to be able to get our generators to let us come in and do trainings. And very frequently, once we get in there and do a training, we'll have the owner or the manager say something to us later, like, and our recycling system just improved dramatically. Like, people are separating for that better. And so there really are these, when you see yourself as a participant, that's the biggest frame. That's the biggest change that we can be fostering, is that sense of ownership and responsibility. And this all makes sense, really, at the end of the day. There's a lot of work in the system space to show sort of the power of interventions. And so this is a great system rubric that was put together by the late Donella Meadows, a really fantastic systems thinker from here in Vermont. And essentially, if you look down this chart, it goes from sort of weakest interventions to most powerful interventions. And so things like rules are actually or not very, but they are weaker. They're not the end game here. We really need people to align with the goals of the system and shift their mindset and paradigm around that. And a fun little example is here in Quick, we wanted to take one of our events and this whole space that public events happen. It's called Atkins Field, and go zero waste and remove disposable products altogether, not even compostable products. And so we have a all reusable, washable, everybody washes their plate. Well, when we went to kick this out, we realized we had a massive behavior change to muster. And so we decided to do something kind of ridiculous, to just build a culture around that behavior. And so we set out and did, in fact, break the Guinness Book of World Records for the largest community dishwashing event ever. That record has since been broken. But I think it's a good example of we created a moment that really helped solidify something in people's minds, and they identify that with that now and take pride in it. The marketers of the world know this very well. It's called I'm sorry. When the law of diffusion is an old idea in marketing, and essentially it's that you really don't want to target your marketing at innovators, and it's not worth spending your time focusing on the laggards on the other end of the bell curve. You really want to focus on your early adopters and then eventually your early majority. And so when we do messaging, when we show up in a school, like a cafeteria, and we're talking to the staff there, we're really trying to figure out who are the early adopters, who are the next ones that are going to follow them. And that sort of gets into how we sort of approach this. And the last sort of high level thing just to make note of, and this is well established in lots of different research, that basically the higher the one-on-one level of contact and personalization of something, the higher the outcome of the behavior change. The lower the contact, the lower the outcome of behavior change. So even in situations where we can't always have one-on-one contact, we can still apply this through using things like behavior modeling, where we have a proxy that's actually modeling the behavior that we want. I'm going to blow through a couple slides just quickly to stay kind of on track and make sure we have plenty of discussion time. I think the bigger piece of this is just that ultimately we need to be clear about the social systems and the physical systems that we're engaging in and where we're trying to get them to, and build relationship and community in order to get there. So we need to go in, and when we're doing trainings, we need to be speaking to kitchen staff as peers, as community members. And we're often looking for ways for them to build an internal culture. So identifying those internal, champions and other folks. So there's just these overarching things. We want to be accessible and have people feel like they're doing it for their own intrinsic reasons. I'm not going to go through all of these, but it just gives you a little bit of a sense of kind of here are the touch points for us in promoting source separation. And what you'll see is essentially it's not just a sign over a container. So we're doing messaging from the first time we get a phone call from somebody. Every first conversation always includes the phrase source separation or something akin to that. Our promotional materials utilize that. In fact, we use it to promote what we do, to say basically we have a high standard, welcome to our community, like pursuing excellence in this regard. It's in our contracts. It's in our, sorry, this squirrely thing is getting me. It's in how we now, well, we'll get into some of these other things, but key to this is also the trainings. I don't think it's possible at this point, having done this work for 25 years, to pursue source separation without a training program. Stores, restaurants, they all have enough to communicate to their employees. You cannot rely on managers to tell their people what to do. In fact, they may do you a disservice. They may have, baggage between them and their employees. They just may be they may be kind of white noise to the employees at a certain point. When we come in, we're a fresh face. We're the face of the program. So we go in and we, refer to drivers by names and tell stories and are engaging. And then it doesn't stop after you get somebody in the program. There's a bunch of, contact that's required to do sort of the maintenance over time. So it's in our promotional materials, in our contracts, we're using very specific language. We have content both focusing on source separation and on materials being banned from the program. We clearly lay out thresholds, so we've had to come up with like a literal count of how many pieces of plastic we sort of tolerate for picking, because we expect there to be mistakes, so we're not intolerant. And we try to show everybody that we're willing to put our work in too, because like a school, they can only do so much, but they can do a lot. So only being able to do so much does not mean throwing up their hands, but it also means us being willing to, have a grabber on the truck and grab a couple pieces of non-organics here and there. We also have, mechanisms for finding somebody for too much picking and also rejecting containers. Because we also follow that chain of custody, we have other labels that go out with things like our eggs and our compost products. And so we have the ability to try to connect folks that may eat our eggs with also their act of separating food scraps in another moment. And help knit it all together. We've tried to get increasingly clear. So we started out with language like compost only on our totes, but we've switched to language like food scraps only on our totes. Sorting areas, totally clutch. Usually as the hauler, you're not in charge of the sorting area, but you may be in there talking with them about the contract or source separation, and every opportunity to help them set up for success should be totally leveraged. And so the layout of the workspaces matters a lot. And if you can show your customers that you get what they have to deal with every day and what they're doing, you just build rapport and trust. And those are totally key ingredients to actually a long-term successful working relationship around source separation. I would say too that very specific things like the order of bins matters a lot. So putting compost first never works well. Start with the things that you want them to, the place where you're the most willing for them to make a mistake, which is the trash, to the place where you're least willing for them to make a mistake, which is the compost. We also really, believe that our customer are the employees or the students of the generator we're under contract with, and so we feel like we're showing up every day to show those folks respect and the sort of behavior that we're asking for back. And so, for instance, we wash our containers very thoroughly, including the outsides of the containers and the lids, because we don't want kitchen staff to think it's a gross experience emptying kitchen buckets. If they do, they're going to kind of do what we call dump and run, and half the time they'll miss the tote and the tote will be disgusting, or they won't pick the trash back out. But if they have clean containers, if everything looks orderly, it already sets a precedent for clean behavior. For us, and I think this should be more broad in the whole industry for hauling, being able to see your material after you've during and after you've tipped it is key. So we have an open top trailer that we tip into. This is intentional by design. This is our old trailer. We now have actually a tray that the tote tips onto, that we can actually pre-screen material as it's coming out and sort of feather it in there and really get a good clean pick. And you can see this really quick, but basically this lacks the tray, but you can see Matt had a good shot at basically being able to view that load that he tipped. And then of course we're willing to pick. So if we're doing this work, it's not like we're expecting 100% all the time. We have to be willing to pick. So we have a grabber on the truck that makes picking easy. We have hose for reaching farther. And we pick and then take pictures and send those pictures to the generator. And aside from documenting the contamination, the other thing that it does is it really helps them see the nature of the contamination so that they can then do the forensics and kind of follow it back to the source. I'm going to skip over the residential pieces. But basically, the more contact you have and the more people understand sort of where the material is going, the more accountable they are to that process. I have a little quick side note. We have these pods I mentioned in the beginning. It's a subscription service. We knew we were going to have some people sort of using them without subscribing, and that's okay. The really interesting thing is we actually it's a bit of a problem for us. We have some locations that might only have a couple subscribers, but they're full every week. So we know a lot of people are using them. But all of our messaging work in our community has been so effective over so long that even the people who are using them illegally are doing a great job source separating. So we may not be getting paid for it, but we're not picking their contamination. They do totally spot on job. And then the last device that we use with our commercial and institutional generators is tote rejection. We try not to reject totes. That never makes anybody feel good. But sometimes we have to, and it's sort of our way of creating a very immediate, relevant kind of consequence of like, oh, now it's your problem. So we typically actually put these oh no signs on in a different way. We turn them around, we hang them from the handle so the tote's actually unusable. But this just was sort of a dramatic example from COVID when all the schools started going to single use everything. And people you don't usually need to do that more than twice to get an effect. We also really try to help customers understand like the real outcomes of this. And so if we weren't careful, the only outcome that they would really get is a cost, a bill from us. So we try to turn our bills into a place to celebrate outcomes. And then once a year, we generate a poster that we can send to each generator that's customized to their diversion. And it helps them both share what they're doing, but also internally sort of really see what the greenhouse gas mitigation is and the nitrogen retention for the food system is. And you know, plenty of folks don't even hang these posters where their customers can see it. They put it in the kitchen where their staff can see it to sort of maintain that motivation. I don't need to get into any of this stuff with most you folks, but basically relationship maintenance is real and it counts. And just to kind of draw it to a close, these are some thoughts that I had just sort of smacked together for you know, opportunities for improvement both here at Blackbeard Farm, our generators, and then also sort of the solid waste district and the state districts and the state. So that kind of captures our program. And at this point, basically my desire is to hear from the other haulers in the space, and you know, with the focus on sort of what are folks doing and where are you having successes, as well as sort of recalcitrant problems like persistent issues that you just don't seem to be able to overcome. And since we have a small group, we can folks can just raise their hand and I'll just call on you. And I don't think we need to use the chat unless you don't want to speak, in which case you're welcome to post it in the chat.
Yeah, and Tom, we did just have a quick question based on some of the stuff you presented. Maybe we'll just take right now is how many contaminants do you allow, and whether that's based on quantity or size or both? I don't know if you want to just address that quickly.
Yeah, I mean, we kind of came up with like the slightly arbitrary number of 5 pieces of contaminant. We don't typically apply that to PLU stickers. In every case, we would be rejecting more totes than we do. So that's typically 5 pieces of pickable contaminants. If we get a tote from a grocery store that every piece of fruit has a PLU sticker on it, that's a rejection. And I'll tell you what, like the ability to source separate is not typically, there are exceptions obviously to this, but we have large grocery stores that do this very well. We've had resorts that do this very well. We've had large and small schools do this very well. We have a prison that does this very well. I mean, scale is not, it presents its own challenges, but size and scale and the nature of the business don't inherently mean you can or can't source separate.
Great. Yeah, well, thank you. Does anyone, I know we do have 3 other haulers in the room, I believe. Does anyone want to jump in and share either what you're doing or what your challenges are or what you've tried that has worked well or hasn't quite worked as well as you'd hoped? Trevor, I see you leaning forward. Is that an indication you're about to share?
Yeah, I'd be happy to, Natasha. I often need to be reminded to be quiet, not to speak up. So, Tom,
Well,
great
cut you off.
presentation.
No, I'm joking.
Yeah, Tom, great presentation as always. You have a model facility. That's actually where I received my training many decades ago now, or a couple decades ago. So, hats off to your work. I think that in general, Casella experiences the same challenges. We, obviously coming up with a program with that level of touch on a at scale program is difficult to do. I agree with everything you say. It becomes a challenge to have that level of input with each and every organization's employees that's doing it. So, to rely on the manager getting the message to the employee, I think you're spot on. I think that's where the challenge often is. One thing that we've seen success with is, especially at resorts, where people have the compost drop-off table or the garbage sorting table. So you drop your tray off, they sort it into the food waste, trash, and recycling. it's not a written rule, but any kind of events that we have, we really promote that. And also at big places like ski areas, it seems to be the only way that we see that cleanliness hitting the standards that we want. But yeah, I guess it's hard to add a lot to that, Tom. You did a good job, and I think everything's right down the fairway of what we see.
Great. Brian or John, do you want to? Brian, you've just unmuted.
Yeah, Tom definitely has a ton of great content, and I've learned so much from the VORS in the past, learning how to deal with this. We're definitely a super small hauler right now, but I've worked in a much larger facility before down in New York City with restaurants and businesses, so I've seen that side. But for us here, I'm kind of being leader of it now. I think the behavior change that I've seen more helpful as recently is not using the word contamination with customers. It makes a lot of sense here, the industry, but kind of more education, or like if there's something that we're taking a photo of and leaving a note for these customers, just calling out, you just say like curb note and then plastic film or produce sticker, and just highlighting those individual things, and especially working at one material at a time. You throw 5 different contaminations at a customer, and it's almost too much. So kind of highlighting the priority of what to focus on. You can always go back the next week or the following month and kind of focus on the next thing. But yeah, I think kind of taking out the mindset of contamination has been effective. I find it a bit difficult in our position as a hauler to kind of really make some big changes, especially around the produce sticker, because we are a hauler, and it doesn't, personally, it affects what we want to see that's coming out of compost. We don't want produce stickers ending up in our soil. Personally, it's a little more difficult as a business to stay on top of customers. So it might become an annoyance to them, and you don't want to lose somebody just because they're willing to jump ship to somebody who won't speak up for it. So that's also a difficult thing as just a hauler, and balancing good customer service with good stewardship. But I think that comes back to kind of having a more genuine conversation. I think is easier to bridge by singling out those individual contaminants and not calling them contaminants.
Yeah, I like that idea of the explicitness of it. I think that's really transparent and more accessible in a lot of ways. And you made me think of Natasha, what was her name? Was it Jennifer Tabanico from
Yep. Who did the source separate or the behavior change last 2 years ago, I guess now. Yeah.
She really hammered on sort of like picking one thing. And so when in doubt, we sort of always talk PLU stickers, because she basically said sort of pick that one thing that, like, if you get that, then you're going to get everything else. So if you can get, our theory has been like, if you can get people to pick their PLU stickers, like, they're going to definitely keep the saran wrap out, so I thought that was a really good point. And the other part, just also on following up in terms of being annoying, and one thing I'm realizing I didn't include in the presentation is we really go out of our way to encourage our drivers to report back when somebody is also just like doing a great job. And so we do try to balance it very intentionally with like just, we like a facilities manager. Now we all have cell phones. So like I have a lot of the facilities managers' cell phones, and I'll just literally text them from the truck, like, especially if folks who have been struggling, I'll say like, wow, it's way down this week. Like they need to feel like they have a little traction. So I think it's not just communicating purely on the negative stuff, but also like trying to balance that with acknowledging people's efforts, even if they're not hitting the goal. Like if they're improving, that's worthy of acknowledgement. What about you, John? Did you got any thoughts on this? Anything that feels like it's working?
Yeah, this was kind of touched on a little bit, but I think really building that relationship with them and being close enough where, say, we pick up and there's contamination, I can just text somebody right there, then and there, and they'll know who it is, they'll know why I'm texting, and they kind of understand that if it's not done the right way on their end, then we're literally picking out by hand. So kind of like you mentioned before, putting a face to it, a name to it, and just building a relationship that it's easy enough. And I kind of went through that part of, I don't want to annoy them, I don't want to annoy the people, but at the same time, like, this is a really important thing. So it's a hard bridge to gap, but I feel I'm comfortable enough with the people we have to be able to reach out and mention, hey, this week was really good, or it was a really bad week last week, not sure what's going on. Do you need me to come in and kind of talk to new staff, things like that, and just keep that relationship very, very open and very open to that communication to let everyone know. I really like the positive reinforcement idea as well, because as in anything, human beings, like, we want to hear good too. So I'd like to do more of that. I've talked to some businesses that we work with and thank them for how well they've done. I mean, I've had some businesses that have never had almost any contamination at all from the beginning. Um, and then others, we have somewhat consistent contamination. I also like the point you brought up about the stickers. If you can get them to take the stickers off, the other stuff probably won't be a problem, because for the most part, our issue isn't really bigger pieces of plastic or anything like that. It's really the stickers and sometimes the rubber bands that are holding things together. So um, the bigger things aren't really there in our system. Um, and I think keeping things simple for people too helps. We don't, from most places, we don't take any of the compostable stuff. We do have a couple that we started to do that when we started the business. And I'll say that every single week that we pick up, we keep that separate. They put that in a separate container. But every week that we pick it up from every one of them, it's always contaminated with other stuff. So I can't imagine picking up that material regularly from everybody. I feel like it'd be a mess from everyone. And these are people that really want to do the right thing too. So I think keeping it simple, communication with your folks. I really like your idea about we've sent photos to people too. That's helpful to let them see what it is. Um, yeah, that's kind of some of my thoughts. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I thought I'd just add something from a handful of years ago from Addison County. I know that they worked with their haulers to do a produce sticker challenge. And so they gave basically almost like a bingo card to fill with the stickers. And then they would leave that once the household or a business filled it out, they would leave it on the tote. The driver would take it. And then the next time they came to pick up, they would deliver like, a 5-gallon pail of compost or a new kitchen caddy or something to like gamify it almost. And I don't know if anyone here has experimented with things like that, but I thought that was an interesting way to make it not sort of so much drudgery or nagging, but a little bit of a game. And then also people who were doing really well anyway had somewhere to put their produce stickers and still got rewarded for that behavior by turning it in. So I think there's a lot of little things like that. Not that I don't think that's going. I think that was like I think they did it for like 3 months or something, some specified period of time, but that was interesting to hear about as well.
Yeah, we use we have like PLU sticker posters, like fill in the words and things like that for schools and homes. The businesses don't really use it that we work with, but we have no reward system. It's just
It's just a game.
Hold out the picture or whatever.
Yeah.
Would be a nice added benefit to it. I've heard of other things like for residential where think it was in Ann Arbor, Michigan years ago, when just getting people to participate was more of a lift than the separating part. You know, they had like competitions between different streets for rates, and so whatever street had the most bins out in a week got like a free coffee card for the local coffee shop. And I thought about like, can we, like with our pods, like can we have, whichever pod has the cleanest material get something, in that regard. Are there, I don't know all the names on here, so I don't want to leave anybody out. Is there anybody else that's hauling or feeling like they are in close proximity to hauling that wants to weigh in on and sort of add something to this? I don't know, John, if you have something. I just want to make sure that all the voices here are getting to participate.
Yeah, and if you are more comfortable with chat, I'm very happy to be your voice. You can go ahead and type in there, and I can read it out for you as well. I know not everybody is comfortable. Yeah, John, it looked like you were going to add something.
Just a quick one. I think kind of circling back to the positive review type of thing. We like to do shout outs to any new business or school or restaurant that we're working with online when they become a new customer. And I feel like during this conversation, I'm thinking that we're going to start doing something highlighting a business, maybe once a month or something that's doing great work as far as contamination. And maybe that will incentivize other places that are following us to see that. So that's something I just thought of in this moment that I think, or maybe I'll highlight it on a newsletter or something like that. Say, hey, we're working with this business. They're always keeping the material clean. Here's how they do it. Maybe talk with someone that works there and interview them and put some quotes in there, something like that. Just a thought off the top of my head.
That's great. So unless anybody else has anything to add to this part, the next part of the session will include a lot of these things. So we can, feel free to kind of come back with things if you realize that you failed to sort of register a thought. Well, actually, before we move on, from the haulers, I know everybody kind of has some of the same and slightly different challenges, but is there a specific persistent challenge that you're running into around source separation within your model that you're struggling with and looking for some peer-to-peer conversation on in terms of resolving?
I would say, I don't know necessarily if it's source separation, but we're kind of our model's designed to, bring in the least amount of waste as possible. And we have a lot of customers. We give free compost service to all of our customers. And with that, we have a lot of people that don't use it because they're backyard composting already. But I think there's probably material to grab from them that they might be throwing out or doing something else with, whether it's like avocado pits or bones or stuff that you don't want in your backyard. So it's kind of been a difficult thing for us to communicate that to those people or prospective customers who think that they don't need our service because they're already composting in the backyard, but we're designed to grab that extra 5-10% that they're not composting in their current system, and I'd say that's kind of been a challenge for us.
For whatever it's worth, we have run into that as well because we've done surveys around here, and it's at least 30%, and in some towns as much as 50% of people compost at home. We're not primarily a residential collector, so it's not our biggest concern. We're psyched that they're composting at home, but one thing our surveys revealed is that a lot of those folks don't compost during the winter at home, or they don't compost their meat like you're saying. So we've done specific profiling of those people for promoting our pods, and saying, hey, like, are you a home composter that doesn't compost in the winter? Like, get a 3-month subscription, that type of thing. helping them see the gap in their system. They may not see it entirely. But I think it's a great point, and somewhere in there is an opportunity.
Yeah, and John just put in that the stickers are really the biggest issue for them. So I think he thinks the best solution is not putting them on, not putting them on from the start, but that's a whole other large change that as haulers they don't have control over. You need to start somewhere else to not let them be put on. And if they aren't on, then no one has to take them off. I often use that as a great argument for supporting the local food system, because if you're shopping from farmers markets and as local as possible, that you may have to deal with rubber bands now. So right, so there's other potential little bits of contamination, but the produce stickers situation seems to abate some. I don't know, Tom, if you or anybody else wants to chime in on that.
No, I mean, I think that it's the right angle. It's going to be a hard lift because it's such a globalized food system, and most of the local food vendor, the folks vending that food, unfortunately their whole computer systems are entirely around that. So tattooing is real. It's starting to happen more. And there are now, like, Compost Manufacturers Alliance does have a PLU sticker that they certify as compostable. I wouldn't trust it with my life, but those things are out there. Trevor, I wanted to just pick your brain publicly for a second, that you guys have a kind of unique view, both being a multi-state operator, being a large operator, working, with different facilities that you're taking the materials to. I'm curious, like, if you having personally been a composter and recycler independently in the past, do you feel like when you look across all of Casella's programming that there are things that are clearly, that they have been the most effective in communications that you guys kind of employ as like best practices?
That's a big question. So effective in contamination removal specifically, Tom? Yeah, I think it's that relationship. Hands down, it's the relationship. It's the relation. It all comes down to behavior change, as you pointed out, and the relationship that you have with the customer, the driver has with their dispatcher, the dispatcher back to the customer. How quick is that feedback loop? How effective is that feedback loop? And how accurate is it? So photos from the driver to the dispatcher to the customer right away to say, this is what we found in your bin. That's effective communication. Where we see it not being effective is when it gets written down and then a note gets passed and an email goes out. And so, you lose that human element of it. And I have every sales training I've done in different divisions or setting up new compost yards. I always go back to the same thing that all of us at this table have done. And I say, look, these hands are the ones that have to pick it out. It's me. And, institute that. So as a driver, you can say to your customer, it's okay. It's acceptable to say, guys, I'm the one that has to deal with this contamination. I'm the one that has to pick this out. It's not some faceless person. It's me. And so I'm asking for the respect of you to follow the rules so that I don't have to deal with this, because I'm super excited to compost your material. And we're driving material out of the landfill for sustainability based. We're making this program available to you. And in return for that, we're just hoping that you can do the simplest thing by removing that sticker before it becomes part of the mix. So I think, and look, it's effective, but it's not perfect. And I think that's another thing that we do have to keep in mind. And I think some folks have said that here. It's a journey. We will always be on it, and we will always be trying to improve, be it our single stream side of the house or food waste. Like, recycle better is a mantra that we carry forward.
Awesome. Thank you.
I don't know if that answered your question.
think that just that sense of really that piece about saying, being able to say, like, if you don't pick it, I'm going to pick it. That, you know, whether people believe in the environmental benefits or not is almost secondary at that point. Most people want to play each other. I think that's like a real truth. You know, most people don't want to. They want to receive respect, and they want to extend the respect that they.
Especially because the customer that we're really talking about outside of Vermont is doing it because they choose to do it. So yes, and there are waste bans in other states, but it's kind of a different customer profile. In New York, those 2-ton and larger generators, it's kind of a different service element. Massachusetts, it's the big generators have a different solution. It's the 1, 2, 4 cart customers that are doing this because they care. They're not necessarily required by law. So if you can appeal to their desire to do the right thing and just say, this is how you have to do it to make it work in our program, they're pretty receptive.
I'd like to add I work with farmers and some pretty small sort of organic transporters, and when dealing with residents, like everyone's been saying, it's iterative, right? Like people will be really good and then stuff starts creeping in. And so I think it's also for some folks that I support, they've found it really helpful to also be able to, whether it's through a newsletter, send something out to the full group. I was working with one farmer and all of a sudden things started creeping back in. And, but it wasn't a lot from any one person. And so he just took one day where he picked everything, put it on a tarp, took a picture, and the message that went out to everybody, all of the residents, was, you may feel like you're just letting 1 or 2 things slip through, but I just spent 2 hours picking this that you see right here in this picture. So it wasn't really personalized, but it was to everybody. And then like after that, for the next several weeks, it was like the cleanest he'd seen it, right? Like everyone was like, oh, like that's right. It has a different impact when it's like, I let 3 things through, what's the big deal kind of thing. So that's just one more nuance that might be interesting to think about, at least for the resident. I mean, I know that's totally different for like businesses and larger generators, but for individual residents or folks who are servicing residential diversion, that's just a different approach that I've seen be actually pretty effective.
Sorry, my computer just dropped, but there I am again.
Great.
So just to pivot a little bit, I'm curious if, I think if we could kind of view the last part of the conversation as like, as haulers looking inward, what's within our power, what can we do better? I think now the intent has been to sort of pivot a little bit outward, and this is where I think let's just open the conversation up to everybody. But looking at places where other entities, waste districts, the state, nonprofit, advocacy groups can help with the process of cultivating a culture of source separation. And so I, was curious immediately just to sort of check in with the haulers about, what are the things that you think you would benefit from to have that your allies at the solid waste district and municipal level and even the state level, what do you need more of to be successful with source separation? I can seed the conversation a little bit in that, for instance, the complexity around paper products is completely overwhelming to us, and the more we come to learn about and understand paper products, the more we realize how they are possibly our like largest risk stream coming into our composting system. And so we're moving towards an entire ban on taking any paper products in our food scraps. And we already have a very, very high standard for those things, but at this point we've sort of decided that unless we get more help, that there is no way that we can successfully take paper products and not be putting ourselves and our compost users at risk for PFAS contamination, for microplastics. It's just too complex, and neither the BPI nor the CMA processes really give you any visibility into the potential risk. So that's one place that we just don't have the bandwidth or the resource power to do a comprehensive assessment on that. We probably don't have the bully pulpit that we need to work with the distributors. And so that's something that we're really looking for some external help with. The other place that I would sort of recognize that we really could use some help from the state, but also from the solid waste districts, is around the use of single-use plastics in publicly funded institutions and entities. Those are the places that we ironically get the most single-use plastic contamination from. Schools, I think occasionally the prison, they do generally a very good job, but when we get it in volume, and it's like Ken salad dressing. I mean, geez, I would love to boycott Ken's altogether. You know, it's ketchup packets, it's mustard packets. And with the schools, ever since COVID, there was a massive change in behavior and procurements at the schools. And so they all went, it appears, from, you know, bulk dispensers to these single serve packets, and COVID's over now. So, you know, messaging from the state to the entities that receive funding through the state and are essentially public entities to mitigate the procurement of those products would be wildly helpful for us.
I would echo a lot of that, Tom. I think that one thing I learned during the conference on Monday, and a point of disappointment for me, was that the state did not act or did not adopt the kind of modeling. I forget how it was, but you know, basically model the behavior that you want to see. So we would love to see a lot more of the state agency buildings going with those durables, going with, you know, more composting. We don't get a lot from state office buildings. And I think that transcends because they often, being such public spaces, have a lot of people that come through the doors. I would love on Monday to not have seen a small food waste container next to the tri-sort bins and seen a 5-cent returnable in the main lobby. Instead, it would be great to have a food waste bin instead of a returnables collection in the main thing. But I think that's a huge one. I think that a re-education to go back to bulk, we totally are aligned on. I think that it's, for so many reasons, it makes a lot of sense to go back to a bulk program. Promotion of durables and regulation of chemicals at the beginning of the pipe and not at the end of the pipe is a big one for us, especially with the PFAS conversation. We as a society have to stop waiting until it's fully consumed to apply regulation. It's not fair to everybody at this table, and it's not fair to those that are managing things at the end of the life. We did not create the chemical. We did not even use the chemical. We're forced to manage the chemical and its problems at the end. But that's I'm up on my soapbox. I'll get off.
Yeah, anyone else want to chime? Yeah, John, go ahead.
I think this kind of goes hand in hand because as a hauler, we all need a place to tip material. So I think working together with the facilities that you can tip at, so we tip at our own place, but if more places won't accept the compostable material being tipped there, less haulers are going to take it. So I think, and then less contamination is going to happen. So I think that's, I know, Tom, you manage everything that you collect. So when that's the case, you have a really vested interest in, and it really means a lot, and you have to do it. To somebody that's just a hauler bringing the material somewhere else, it's not as important. And I think that we have to find a way to work closely with the facilities that we're tipping at to figure this out as well. And my daughter agrees with me in the back.
And I would agree with you as well. And we have a couple facility operators here in solid waste districts that might want to pipe in on that. I think to Dan's or Brian's point earlier about people leaving for other operators with lower standards, that has been a thing for us. And one of the interesting things, we don't handle all of our material here. We actually also deliver to a couple other one independent facility and then a municipal facility who also receive from other haulers. And I would say generally, I can just tell that, you know, our stream is a lot cleaner. And so, yeah, we feel the pressure of being as this becomes more of a normalized market, there are more folks getting in. And so we have folks coming in who, you know, walk into our customer and say, well, I'll do it for 50% of black dirt, but they don't do a single training. They don't do any source separation. They just pick it up and transport it. And their cost is so much lower. You know, we're building in all of these things that I just displayed in the presentation. Those are real costs to me, you know, and we pay livable wages to folks. So like, I'm not doing every one of those things. Somebody's on payroll doing those things, you know. So this building a community around these things so that one, as haulers, we're not undermining each other is huge. And then two, having the composters also maintain a standard will help set the market, you know, in the right place. I couldn't agree more. What about you, Brian?
I don't feel like I need much where we are at right now. I think the one thing that stands out to me is, you know, the wide use of the compostable bags, which, you know, it's good to have at the beginning to get more people on board, especially during the transition of, you know, when the act, you know, when the law came into effect. But, you know, at what point can we start moving away from them statewide as people kind of manage their bin bucket totes on their own better? Interesting to hear your input on paper products where, you know, we don't require anybody to use the bags. We let them do it because our disposal facility accepts them, but we line our buckets with, you know, newspaper, uncoated newspaper, assuming that, you know, better than compostable bags. But I'd love to see, I guess, where you're pulling that from in that research as well, just to know more.
Yeah, I mean, the piece on the paper products is because of all of the things, if you heard the previous presentation at all, that, you know, basically there is PFAS are everywhere at this point, and so even recycled paper. So like, and I hate to say this because I continue to support them. Let me just be clear, I continue to support them as the Vermont-based company, but you know, recycled toilet paper through otherwise conscious manufacturers is going to have a higher, you know, it's going to have PFAS in it. So then we're, as consumers, put in these awkward positions of having to choose between virgin paper and recycled paper that you're touching your body with in sensitive places that has chemicals in it. It's tricky. So, and that's, most of these products, a lot of these things don't need to be declared. And so people, you know, we don't really adequately regulate the coffee filter market. And paper towels, most paper towels have plastic fibers woven into them to increase the strength of them. But again, we don't have a regulation on that. There's no registry to say who's doing that. And a lot of these things will say paper, and if you chase it back to the manufacturer, they'll even tell you it's 100% paper, but you'll see somewhere else that it shows up that there's actually a plastic fiber in there. So they're, it's just like we call compostable plastics compostable, but that only is one metric that they're being defined around when they have all of these other characteristics that aren't even being, you know, discussed. So it's, unfortunately, we live in a very complicated moment right now. And that we're going to be able to do that lift by ourselves. So I think that's where we really need the public entities to sort of ensure, the public trust in a way. I'm curious, Dan or Bob or anybody else that's running a facility like this, just to John's point about accepting materials, like what's your experience on the other end of the receiving end, and what are you doing, and what do you need from haulers, but also what can you do to sort of enforce something, or are you doing to enforce something, a standard?
Am I audible?
Yep.
Yeah.
Sorry if the audio quality is poor. I'm outdoors. And anyway, so yeah, I run the compost facility in Williston, Vermont, outside of Burlington, and we have struggled, particularly over the last several years since full implementation of Act 148, with the amount of contaminants coming in. And because we do essentially no hauling, or very limited hauling of the food that comes to us, we're completely dependent on third-party haulers to do all of that work. We do have a robust outreach and education staff. Well, actually, we don't. We have a staff, but there are only 3 of them for our whole entire county, and there's something like, I don't know, 7,000 businesses that they're supposed to be responsible for, this one person. So it's a tough game on our end. And the way that we are combating it, because we would like nothing more than to have low contamination food waste, of course, and have enjoyed relatively clean food waste for a very long time, is that we, after a couple of years of concerted effort, have finally implemented a contamination policy that is quite robust with financial penalties, and have shopped it around to the various haulers and given them lots of warning. And unfortunately, unlike Brian, who does haul food to us, most of our haulers are less interested, or less committed to having high quality stuff coming to us. And yet we've gotten really good feedback even from the haulers, some of the bigger ones, saying that we needed a tool to be able to pass along fines for folks who are not doing it well. So thank you for doing this. So we're not actually going to start fining until July 1, but it was just fully adopted by our board last week, and we're very excited. We also took several other steps, including hiring a full-time person whose job it is to be responsible for the cleanliness of incoming materials and doing spot checks and such, which not every facility is going to be able to do resource-wise, of course. And it's been, decades in the works, but we're finally there, and we're hopeful that will be, we know it's not going to be panacea, but hopeful that will give us the tools we need to make some real good change in the right direction. And I would echo everything that was said about durable products. That's been one that drives me nuts, that there are less and less durable products in food service every day. And the paper one is also a big challenge. And staying on top of what's the biggest, scariest potential contaminant is also a challenge. And we do our best, but it's sometimes hard to stay ahead of the curve on that as we learn more. Okay, I probably am not very audible, so I'm going to shut.
No, that was great, Dan. And I just, on a personal note, congratulations for getting that policy through, because I know you've been a champion of that, and that's a hard. It's been a long run for you, so that's really great that you've got that now. On that front, I'm just curious, have you? Is there a little snapshot of what that new policy, how you got? Is it a visual screening? Is that how you're going to mostly be doing that?
Yeah, we went through several iterations, and we inspected 150 different loads and tried out different methods, honing what we thought was going to work best. And then what we landed on was a visual check where we're using percentage of contamination, percentage of contamination by volume, and then we have a threshold of 5%, as anything below 5% is acceptable. We tried for lower originally and realized that was unachievable. And then anything above 10% is a rejectable level. And so in between there, that we find them different amounts depending on where they fall within that spectrum. But and then apart from that, we have a list of particularly problematic materials that we will just tack on a fine, regardless of how clean the rest of the stream is. So if there's 10 tons of perfectly good food waste and then a bag of glass, we will still have the ability to pass along a fine and hopefully correct that kind of behavior. Does that answer your question?
Awesome. I
Yeah.
just wanted
Mhm.
to, yeah, go ahead, Ben, and I'll bring in Tara's chat points in a second.
All right, thanks. Yeah, I just wanted to add one note to what Dan was just saying, and thanks to everybody that's been chiming in. I'm very interested in what haulers need for resources, and anywhere the state can kind of chip in to help out. We've got some resources on the way, but it's always helpful for me to hear what you need and what your problems are, and we can try to work with you on those things. So more on that later. But I just wanted to say about Dan's point, they did a great job pulling together a contamination load auditing program. And from the solid waste certification standpoint, we've been working to implement those into every organic certification that comes through for renewal or for amendment. So it's not like we're not able to do them all at once, unfortunately. But whenever someone comes in for an amendment or for recertification, we're requiring that be baked in. And to take it one step further, we're actually including conditions that if it exceeds your contamination threshold in your plan, then the load needs to be rejected and the state needs to be notified. So that way we can kind of work together to if there is somebody that's just kind of chronically, you've been working with them forever and they're just not getting it and whatever the deal is, then you can say, okay, well, this isn't me, the hauler, imposing this limitation on you. This is a state law that we're trying to help you succeed with. And that can take the pressure off you as the hauler and you as the facility, and allows the state to step in and sort of do the education piece, work with the generators to get that cleaned up, and sort of fill that role so you don't have to feel like you're the sheriff in town. So I just wanted to add that piece to what Dan and folks at Green Mountain Compost have done. And I'll be quiet. Thank you.
That's super great. I'm so glad to hear that. That's a great piece of movement. I just wanted to quickly respond to Tara's question, and I think I may have misunderstood it when I first read it, but it was just a question about whether employees that are unionized have ever sort of raised any concerns about having to add a task to it. That did come up at one school that we worked with. Generally, we do not promote the staff having to do the separating. I'll just be clear about that. I do agree, like with Trevor's description of a resort, in certain environments, it can be a safer thing to have staff do it, but at a school, I think it's an opportunity lost to have the staff clean up after the kids. I think the opportunity is the kids learning to do this themselves. And so really the staff's role tends to be more of just checking in the container and bringing it out to back of house where we pick it up, and it's no different than bringing the trash out really at the end of the day. So that hasn't been an issue for us so much. So is there anybody else that wants to sort of weigh in on and maybe we just have an open discussion right now. We've got about 8 more minutes for just open discussion around just generally moving towards source separation. Everybody here is representing different parts of the system, which is exciting. If folks want to ask other participants needs from one another, or are there, we just got an invitation from Ben to give feedback. Is there more feedback to the state for opportunities where the state can play a leadership role in helping to mitigate this or promote source separation? I think specifically like with John and Brian in mind, like as smaller operators, like you have limited resources and capacity. Are there things that ANR could be doing that can uplift, your operations and make this part of the work feel more functional and less of a headache?
Go ahead,
Yep.
John.
So we haul in Massachusetts as well. We're right on the line, the Vermont line. So there's currently food waste ban that they're trying to lower, kind of like Vermont has already done. And this may have already been done before in Vermont, but there's a program right now in the state where they have a group that will come into businesses and kind of help teach them how to do this, funded through the state. So that's something we do anyway, but it's nice to have someone having your back in a big way to be able to take some of that burden off of us as a small business. We only have so much time and energy and work we can do. And so I think that is something I'm guessing that was probably done in the past when the ban was going into effect in Vermont. I don't know, but that's something that I feel is like really helping us right now is having that um, resource to say, hey, this business is interested. They'll help make signage and they'll really work directly with us to help get a business on board and kind of not necessarily, I wouldn't say sell the idea to them, but present to them the benefits of why, because we're in Massachusetts here, we're trying to basically hopefully get to the same level that Vermont is in at some point. So I think that's a big one going forward.
Yeah, thanks, John. I think that's. Oop, is it all right if
No,
I just
please.
jump in? Sorry. Sorry, I just kind of helped myself. I apologize, Tom and Natasha. I was going to say one of the things I'm hearing is it might make sense for the state to make the resources that are already available more prominent and let the haulers know where they are, because we already have a lot of this stuff, and it sounds like you may not have heard that they're available or know where to find them on our website. So that to me is a step one of like available. How can people get their hands on it? Make sure that's a bit like easily accessible to everyone, and start there, and then fill in the gaps with what we need to build from there.
Ben, have you guys ever thought about having a hauler training program? Even if it weren't mandatory, but like a little like the compost certification, but an opportunity for somebody to plug in for a 4 to 8 hour course that kind of, is like a boot camp and really helps people find everything in one place. And, maybe they could get signed up for being on the right lists in their districts and things like that.
No, I hadn't thought about a training program. I think we were talking, Trevor, I don't remember if it was with you at Casella, but we were talking about maybe doing some sort of webinar with haulers to invite all their clients, you know what I mean? And just saying, here, the state's going to put on a presentation of what the baseline requirements are. So we had kind of batted that around. Nothing came of that yet. But it sounds like it's in a similar vein, Tom, to what you were saying. And it certainly, I mean, we have a whole materials management section in the program that is doing this outreach. I know I heard from one of them today that they were at Shaw's doing organic source separation stuff at Shaw's. So I know they're out there doing the work, but it would be nice if everyone was kind of in the same loop and knew what was happening, I guess.
So this is Bob Spencer in Brattleboro, and I think Ben Shannon is planning to have some hauler meetings. Shannon, from your staff. In fact, she's organizing some with Bennington County and Windham County for haulers. Are you aware of that?
I know the materials management section is planning to do a bunch more source separation focused stuff, but I didn't know specifically that, no.
Yeah, and also the solid waste districts throughout Vermont provide education and outreach. Like John Pitroff was talking about down in Massachusetts, the state has a contract with a not-for-profit that provides all sorts of technical assistance right at the generator, the food scrap generator level, with signage and training. We do that through my solid waste district. We constantly work with any generator. We'll do signage, we do training. And so I think both what all three haulers here have been saying is really true. You've got to hold their hand to some extent. You got to do initial training. You need to have follow-up, and you need feedback from the haulers and composters. And we've grown our program in Brattleboro really successfully, doing residential curbside collection for over 10 years. And so I was very skeptical that residential curbside would work, but it actually does.
Yeah, I think Brian, I just want to give Brian, I think, had started to say something a few people ago. So I just wanted to give Brian a chance to weigh in, and then we'll go to John.
Yeah, I feel pretty supported for what we need, I guess, whether it's from the state or CSWD. I guess our only gap is kind of back to those harder to compost backyard composting, and whether or not it makes sense to kind of not allow those in the trash where available. You know, in Shenandoah County, Dan might disagree with this, but his facility seems to be more than capable of you know, breaking down these materials that are still allowed to be sent to landfill, and we're capable of capturing them and bringing them to there. So, you know, it doesn't work statewide, but I think where it does work, it might be interesting.
Just to clarify, Brian, are you referring to the state's allowance for home composters to not to throw away like meat material if they're home composting?
Exactly.
We got.
I think Trevor wants to say something.
Was John in front of me though?
Yeah, John, go ahead, and then Trevor.
Sure, I just got a quick one. I just wanted to clarify with Ben and everybody else here. If I know that there's a lot of resources available in the state of Vermont. Actually, when I first started the business, we were getting certified in Vermont first, but if there's anything that I don't know, it's more my ignorance than anything, because I've done so much work in Massachusetts and really connected with a lot of programs here because we've been hauling more here. So I do want to clarify that Vermont does have a lot of resources available. And I remember those emails a couple of years ago, very helpful. People would send me all sorts of, I watched the old roundtables to learn, and there was a lot of different resources, probably like the thing I mentioned earlier. So I don't want to make it sound like that's not available, Ben, or that it's not easy to get. It's just my focus has been more on Massachusetts. So I do know that you guys have a lot of that stuff, and it's actually not that hard to get. It's just I haven't kept up on it since a couple years ago when I first started. So.
Right, thanks. And Trevor, we have about
and
2 minutes left, just so you know.
We're coming up on the end, and I think that just tying back to Monday and learning that through the waste characterization that there's potentially 70,000 more tons of residential food waste in the waste stream. I'd love to see us come together as an organics group with the state and try to really have some meaningful discussions on how to tackle that. 70,000 tons is a game changer for every facility and every hauler and for the environment. So I think, maybe a really good positive takeaway as to how can we collectively come together and tackle that number.
Right, thanks, Trevor. Tom, you want to?
The last thing I wanted to offer, and this is sort of, targeted to Ben and ANR, but also the waste districts, is, I would love to see, and I haven't seen everything that the state has generated for educational sort of outreach work, but I would love to see really more use of behavioral sciences in the way that we approach these things, and the use of social marketing, and I don't mean social media, but social marketing to promote these things. So I think, who are the champions, the unsuspecting champions that we can put out in front of the statewide or more local communities to really promote ideas? Can Rusty DeWeese do a stand-up bit on source separation, or who are those leverage points, or how are we reaching them? That's what we're looking for when we go into a generator. If you go back to that adoption curve and you focus on the early adopters and those like next level, middle of the road folks, I'm not looking when I walk in for the person who's going to be the obvious innovator in the room, because everybody already decided that they were a wingnut. We're looking for that sleeper who clearly is going to grab it, but already has this social rapport with everybody that they set the cultural tone in the kitchen or whatever the thing is. So I would love to see just some creative, lighthearted, but really culture building, and focusing on the culture as opposed to the mechanics. That would be my one of my specific suggestions, requests. I know you have a great team that are doing more and more stuff, so maybe that's all in the works.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion, Tom. And I think, I know we're short on time, but I think what we're committed to doing is building the resources that people need. But also it might make sense for us to shoot out a ping to the haulers and just say, we're going to be working on these resources. If anyone's interested in being involved, because we've even been talking about short videos, Tom, similar to the old Highfield series that you put together, like just a really like vanilla basic 90-second video on how to source separate, that everyone can use, any hauler can use and share with their generators, things like that. And that would be a good place to key in on, like you were saying, those characters that can drive like behavioral change, that everyone respects and would follow or whatever. So getting those people involved and into the resources as we can, I think that all makes sense. And I think we're willing to do it, but we need the ideas and sort of we're open to them. So just let us know, I think.
Yeah, and hopefully you guys see the hauling community as a great vehicle for moving the things you generate, out to the public, because we've all got the vested interest in bringing it to our customers, So I didn't, Caroline, do you want to share out just the recap?
Sure, I can. Hi, everybody. I was just in the background taking notes and trying to just focus on sort of what's the takeaways from what we heard today. To summarize that as we close here, basically really agreement around initial training of generators being super important, feedback from haulers and follow-up, keeping communication simple with generators, sending photos of contaminated loads is helpful, trainings, and kind of from that point of let them know that haulers pick through contaminated loads manually, and that other things are helpful, like educational posters was mentioned, uplifting good practitioners and outreach materials, and also just list this last thing I wrote down, find those champions to promote your behavioral change that we want to see, maybe to service backyard composters throughout the winter month, PLU stickers being one of the largest challengers that haulers don't have control over, recommendation to buy directly from the farm to keep contaminants out. Then haulers need to work closely with facilities where they're tipping at, to create those systems to uphold source separation throughout. And this discussion around programs from through the state, there's a lot all happening. Noted ANR saying committed to creating the resources people need. Little discussion about a hauler training program, and then potentially a stakeholder group to keep working on how to really tackle the challenge of doing the work for all the organics that are being generated throughout the state and beyond.
Awesome, thank you. And I didn't get a chance to put on, but I just wanted to quickly give a shout out that Caroline's with Rural Vermont, and for many in the organic space, they may not think of Rural Vermont as necessarily a organization that works with this side of things, but because of the inherent interface between organics collection and agriculture, Rural Vermont's been a real champion of helping to advocate for the farm side of these equations, and really keeping this carbon in the local food system to be growing more food. So great to have you, and thank you for note taking.
Yeah.
So I think we're out of time. Thank you. It's great to see your face.
Yeah, thank you, Tom and Caroline.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. Have a good night.
Everybody, thanks as always to all of you for coming and participating and sharing your experiences and questions and challenges. And we hope to see you at more VORS sessions. We've got one more session tonight and 2 more days to go. So some good programs still coming up.
Thank you for all awesome work, Natasha, and what a great event like you put on, and each year it just kind of grows and becomes more dynamic. So you have all of my appreciation and gratitude for that.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Take care, everybody.
Bye.